since our faithful and trusty Beth Copeland is not here. But welcome to Wellness Wednesday, Georgia Christian Business Network, where we have a good time and hopefully get a bunch of good information to everybody too for what God has given us that we can share with other people. My name's Rich Oswald. I'm at Legacy Counseling Center. And like Pamela and myself, we're corporate sponsors for GCBN, and love to have Pamela back here today, our long lost wisdom bearer and friendly smile. And this we have Jinnie with us, who's also a specialist in grief. So this month we're talking about grief, and I came up with the title "Good Grief" for those of us who are old enough to remember Charlie Brown and all that. That's kind of what triggered my mind when Beth and I were talking about what would be a fun topic title for today. Yes. And there she is sneaking in, even though we can't see her. It's like the Holy Spirit speaking into our meeting. I won't.
She's going to be at a meeting today, so that's why she's not going to be with us.
You need to mute her. Is that it?
Yeah. I just sent her I am, so maybe she'll hear that. Yeah, there she goes.
There you go. All right, cool, good deal. But this, I guess, first few weeks of March we're studying or looking at grief, and in the last couple of weeks we have Karen Harrison coming back, who works in the nutrition field, and I'm not sure exactly what she's going to be talking about, but I'm sure it's going to be great, awesome, and wonderful. And as tradition goes, we'll introduce ourselves, and since I guess I always start, I'll start. So I'm going to overrun you ladies, but I do have a counseling practice called Legacy Counseling. You get us at legacycounselingga.com over in the little town of Snellville. That's not becoming quite so little anymore, where everybody is proud to be somebody. It's on the east side of Atlanta, and I work with individuals, couples, and families from adolescents on, dealing with some issues that they may just be troubling them in the moment that they need to work on, or some longer standing things that they keep finding themselves doing the same thing over and over again and can't seem to break that habit. And some of that can be tied in what we're talking about today, of grief, where there's pain and things from the past that really are just haunting us today. And I have background in degrees in mechanical engineering and auto mechanics and construction, and I have 4 beautiful daughters and a wife who still says yes when I ask her to marry me. So that's pretty cool.
I'm Pamela Bridgeman, and I have a practice called A Healing Journey Counseling and Consultation in Northwest Georgia, specifically Cartersville, Georgia. And I know that it's not Black History Month, but this is just a tidbit. Cartersville, Georgia is where the first slaves were freed by Sherman in the state of Georgia. There's a landmark, not
cool.
far from here.
That's a great tidbit.
I have been practicing compassionate care since 1976. I am a licensed clinical social worker and an Air Force veteran. I do the same kinds of things in my practice that Rich does. I do focus on trauma-informed care, and as a veteran, I'm particularly interested in helping military members and military veterans and their families as well. And I have one son, a gorgeous daughter-in-law, and 2 wonderful grandchildren. Teenagers now. Can you believe it? One of them is graduating this year.
I thought you just
and
graduated.
Coming over here to college at Spelman. And so.
Oh, nice.
That's great. Well, I am not a counselor. I always wanted to be a counselor or a therapist growing up. And the route I ended up taking after a long corporate career was to become a certified coach and an advanced, what am I called? An advanced certified grief recovery method specialist. Try saying that, even one time. It's kind of a mouthful. But, so most of how I'm informed about grief is from a place called the Grief Recovery Institute that has been operating worldwide for, I think it's about 40 years. And yeah, it's been a great education for me. And now my coaching practice serves primarily women leaders, executives, and entrepreneurs, because I know what it's like to be a businesswoman that also has family obligations and other things I'm passionate about, and to have too much at stake to stay stuck. So that's the audience that I resonate with.
Oh, I like that.
Thank
Too
you.
much at stake to stay safe. That is awesome, Jinnie.
Man,
Well,
yeah.
I think I'm going to write that on my whiteboard for my clients when they come in.
Okay.
You don't have that trademarked or anything, do you?
No, but apparently I'm going to have to need to. So
Yes, seriously. You know, this is
my name too.
this is
Oh, I'll put your
recorded.
name.
And,
I'll make sure I put your name on it. And I think I'll post it on my business Facebook page too.
The
woohoo!
most important thing is it resonates, right? I mean, I just have a heart for those of us who are high achievers, a lot of things in our lives that we love, and we don't want to drop those balls, in addition to how bad it feels just to feel grief, right? Like that's just a good situation. So that's what we're here to help people find some answers to today, right?
Cool, exactly. And with that, Jinnie, it's kind of like, why don't you go ahead and start us off on what about grief? Why are we talking about it this month? And what kind of brought you into this circle other than Beth, because she loves to just connect everybody together. She is that way.
Right. Well, I guess I'll just start by sharing a little bit about my story. I had a very chaotic childhood. I transitioned between a lot of different family members for a variety of reasons. The pendulum swung between, upper middle class and being on welfare. And so I just had a lot of chaotic experiences, some traumatic experiences. And when I was raised in a stable home, it was by my grandparents, who, of course, A, are the greatest generation, but B, not really down with emotional support for life, right? Like their experience was you power through it.
Suck it up.
Yes. Just forget it didn't happen, that whole kind of thing. So that is, that turned me into one of these overachiever types and suck it up types. And then my grandmother actually passed away. So she had raised me. I was her primary caregiver in the last decade of her life. And so, I had my sort of pivot moment where I fell down with grief at age, I think I was about 47. And so I know what it's like to live for like 9 months with debilitating grief, not want to get up and take care of business. It really threatened my business. I was self-employed at the time, threatened my marriage. And so when I found the grief recovery method, it was super successful and impactful for me. And then when I found out I could do it, that I could get certified to bring it to other people, for me, that changed my trajectory. And that's why we're here today. And now that I'm in my practice for a little while, I've realized that I kind of consider myself the world's happiest grief coach. I like to share because that shows the power of healing, right?
Yes.
Yes. I used to feel strange that my presentations weren't morose and depressing and everything. But the truth is, one of the things about grief is it steals your hope. And I want people to realize there is hope. There is a future. It's going to be a different normal than you're used to, but that doesn't mean it's not going to be good. And so
I like that too, Jinnie. One of the things I always try to get my clients to come to the place of is celebrating the life of their loved ones. So that having that, like you said, that hope and that even a peace and a joy that can set in even in the midst of grief.
Yes. And the process that I walk people through gives them an opportunity to reflect on the relationship of a loved one that they've lost, or maybe, even a challenging experience, but there are usually good memories mixed with bad. And people really like that opportunity to spend that time thinking about that relationship. I mean, it's crazy that in our normal course of our days, it never would occur to us to sit down and say, I just lost someone that was pivotal to my life, but we're just like, but I'm going to go to work the next day. We don't think to sit and do that, so I like that the process I use encourages people to reflect on that. There's lots to be gained there.
Cool.
So Beth had titled this, does grief even exist? What is grief? So what I thought we could do today is just talk through a couple of different definitions of grief. Again, they're all informed by my training from the Grief Recovery Institute, but they tend to be a little different than what we think on the street when we think of a definition, So I thought I would toss a few nuggets out there and see what we want to say about them, or maybe see what our audience has to say about them.
Sounds great.
I'm really looking forward to hearing your perspectives as professional counselors and therapists and social workers, to see how our definitions may jive or not. We'll see.
All right. Well, you got that first one you want to throw out there,
I
Jinnie?
got the first one, which is, can you guys see that?
Normal natural reaction.
Woo!
Yeah.
I
Grief
like it.
is the normal natural reaction to a loss of any kind, or even a change of any kind. And to me, this is important because I think our culture makes us feel crazy if we don't feel better in 3 days? We get 3 days off work. They make us feel crazy if we don't feel better in 3 days, instead of recognizing that this is, grief is the process I think God designed for us to deal with change and loss. But we treat it.
Research even says grief can last 6 months or longer, even a lifetime, depending on the depth of your relationship with the loss. Mm-hmm. And even because it lasts that long, doesn't necessarily mean that you're in some kind of bad place. It doesn't mean that you haven't healed. It just means that there's still that person-shaped place in your heart, or that event-shaped place in your heart. Mm-hmm. And you learn, and you'll know this term from DBT, Rich, you learn the radical acceptance.
Mm-hmm. Well, what I hope for people is that, what I really talk about, I believe you can achieve freedom from grief if you take certain actions to work on your healing. The freedom I'm talking about is the ability to go back and occasionally feel sad memories about a person, as well as the happy memories. The point is to have access, right? And not get stuck to where you can't function should you have occasion to tap into those memories. So it's not that I think you're right. We can't probably claim that we would never feel sad about not having someone with us again. But I think there's a way, emotions can come and go. That's how they're designed. They're not lifelong truth, right? So there can be some freedom where a sad emotion can come and you can experience it for a little while and it goes away. And then a good emotion comes and you feel it for a little while and then it goes away.
Mm-hmm. Your phrase, occasional access. I like it.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's interesting you're putting around different words too. You have the grief and you have sadness, and you said loss was in there, but Pamela, you mentioned that there's a person-shaped hole or an event-shaped hole, and of distinguishing grief's a normal, natural response. But then when we talk about grief, we also use other terms there. And you're talking about being free from grief, but also experiencing sadness and having that access when you want to or need to have it. So it starts getting sort of a little bit more difficult necessarily to just define it as normal and natural.
So Jinnie, what did you learn in your training about? Because I know for Rich and I, we have to help our clients distinguish between, quote, clinical depression and that natural, normal response to a loss. So what did you learn about, about that difference?
Okay, I'm going to answer that question. And first I want to say, Rich, you could not have set me up any better if we had planned this, because I have an answer to what you were asking too. So my answer to you, Pamela, is that I believe that mental health and mental wellness is on a spectrum. And there are certain things that are not medical issues, right? Like depression is a medical diagnosable issue. And of course, other mental illness type of issues. So grief is a normal human function. It's part of how we're all designed. So it doesn't fall into that category of medical or an illness. So in that case, it's natural and normal. But I do think we should say sooner than later that I believe people have to take actions to heal their grief. Grief does not go away on its own with time, which is why some people end up in grief for their life.
6
because
months in there, yeah.
Yes, because either they don't believe they don't know there's a solution, or maybe they believe it would be a betrayal to no longer feel grief. You know, some people kind of don't want to get healed for that reason. So I'd just like to make a public service announcement. There are some effective things you can do if you are sick of feeling bad and you choose to make that change, and they really work. So, but I'm gonna go back to what Rich said about all the different words. I believe that grief is not a singular emotion. At the Grief Recovery Institute, we believe it is a set of conflicting emotions.
Like that.
And I can use an example from my own past. I got married like a hair's breadth before I turned 40. And I was ecstatic. Getting married was very important to me, especially as I was getting older. But I also experienced a lot of loss of freedom. You know, I had been a successful single person doing things my own way for a long time. So freedom over my time, freedom over my money, freedom over, you know, how we were going to spend our social lives and things like that. So mixed feelings can come. And so grief is possible with any change, even a happy change like a marriage or a birth or a retirement, because any change implies the ending of something else. I can't think of many that don't. So so that's why I'm able to say grief, the set of conflicting emotions that get you stuck, that can be short term. But as a human, frankly, what I wish for humans is that we have our full human experience by experiencing sadness and experiencing happiness and disappointment and ecstasy, right? Like we need the whole thing if we're going to live this full life that God designed for us. Although I will say, as a society, we all run from the more challenging ones, right? Like we feel like it's our job to avoid ever feeling sad or avoid ever admitting that we're hurt, you know. But I think that's part of the full experience.
It is, but we don't like the negative ones for sure. I don't think God designed us initially for the negative either.
I think it's important, at least for me, when I'm talking about emotions, it's important for me to help people to understand that emotions are neither good nor bad, positive nor negative. They just are. And you've heard me say this before, Rich, that there are some times each emotion is appropriate at some time.
For sure.
And so I think the example that you probably heard me use when we were talking about maybe anxiety is when I said, I would hope that someone would panic if someone was coming at them with an open switchblade. You know, normally you think of panic as a negative emotion, but in that instance, that's a very appropriate emotion because it gives you your flight
right.
instinct. And so I think, and as I'm listening to Jinnie, I think that as we're looking at grief, too, those conflicting emotions, it's not necessarily that they're negative or positive, but they just don't mesh well together at the same time.
Yeah. And I'd probably, I guess it's just different words thing. I say that if I look at emotions, and God had emotions, right? It's recorded the breadth of emotions. God and Jesus experienced all of them.
Yeah.
So it's just kind of this elephant has ears. I have ears. I'm an elephant thing, but it's more of, if God experienced all the emotions and God is good, then the emotions must be good also. Right. But they are positive or negative. There's happy, those are positive.
I can.
That is negative. So I'm just tweaking I
can definitely.
So that we can validate, like, having emotions is a good thing. The ability to feel is excellent, right? That's the whole leprosy, was the loss of ability to feel certain things. That's why they got damaged and they couldn't heal, because they didn't even know they were damaged. And it was that perpetual thing. So knowing something is hot and is burning you is a good thing, even though it's not a positive experience being burned.
Yeah.
But it is a good thing to know. So I try to help people have the freedom to feel.
I can definitely concur with
whatever it is.
Yes.
And embrace it as good. Because to me, it's like gauges on a dashboard. But I always want the gauges to be on the positive side. I like when my fuel tank's full.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. But it doesn't always stay full. There's times where it goes to empty. And if I just say, well, that's a negative feeling and I don't want to acknowledge that, so I'm just going to pretend it doesn't exist, because I only
That's
want
not
to
very
feel
healthy.
positive, we're going to have a problem.
Right.
Eventually, I'm going to run out of gas.
Right.
So is it inconvenient to stop for fuel? Yeah, if I'm on a road trip and I'm hauling and I'm doing great, I don't want to pull over and fill up, but I need to in order to keep on going. So that's a good thing to know. And to me, that's helpful. My geeky engineer side. The only
That's
thing
what
you
I
can-
love about you, Rich.
right, but as an engineer and anybody who's working with things, gauges are critical. If we can't measure it, and even in business, right, there's the KPIs and stuff. If we can't measure it, we can't do anything with it, right? So we don't know how to adjust. So if we don't have measurement devices, I mean, we're kind of flying blind, and we could change something and not know whether it has a positive or negative effect at all, right? And it's tying in with Jinnie's thing of there are things you can do to change those things. So if I'm stuck in depression, like Pamela, you and I talk about this stuff, even just the CBT of the ants, right? The automatic negative thoughts. If you're not paying attention to what you're even thinking, you can't do anything about it. You just feel bleh, right? So I feel bleh. Okay. But that's just the gauge telling me you feel blah, but what is that gauge showing me about what's going on that we can actually address? So
Because it always points to something.
It always
and
indicates something.
Importantly, to what Jinnie is talking about, it points to a way to move forward.
Absolutely. Yeah. I can stop and get gas in the gas station. I'm not just freaking out that my gas gauge is on E. Right? Yes. I might freak out if I look on my map and say the next gas station is 30 miles away and then the lights blinking. Yeah, well, that's my own fault for not weighing the importance of the gas gauge soon enough, right? That kind of parallels life too. We got this gauge. Oh, ignore. Ah!
Or not owning a car like I do with really good gas mileage.
Yeah. Right. Well, then you do the electric cars, I think, are even worse right now, because if you're running low on battery, you're like, there's no charging station anywhere near this. Anybody got a quarter-mile long extension cord? Because I'm going to run out of battery power here.
So,
too.
Jinnie, how do we get to a charging station with grief? What are some of those things that you are wanting to share with us?
Aren't you fancy, Pamela?
That was fancy, but you know what? I do have a car-related analogy that I think Rich will appreciate. It's kind of similar to the gas station analogy. It goes back to the false idea that time heals wounds as some kind of magic elixir. So a word picture we use to describe that is, if your car got a flat tire, would you pull over at the side of the road and sit and wait for it to magically inflate itself? No. You need action, and you may need expert action, right? Like you may need expert assistance, whether that's AAA or the similar metaphor we use is, if you broke your leg, would you sit there and hope it's going to heal well on its own? No, you would go somebody who knows legs, and you would have their help to fix it. So that's why, I think the more and more experts we have out there that can support people through grief, and the more people know that those resources are available, that's who you can go to, because grief is a broken heart. It's analogous to a broken heart. It's not like a cold that you get over in a few short months or a few short weeks and go back to normal. It's more like a permanent change. So that's I think
and that's interesting. The broken heart analogy, Jinnie. And I'm thinking in terms of, if we had, say, a plaque that's in a heart shape and it breaks, you can put those pieces back together with super glue, but the cracks are still visible. And I think that's what happens with grief. And what you said earlier, Jinnie, about us grief being able to access when we want to, those cracks actually show us that the memory is still there, right? And we don't have to see ourselves as broken, but as healed with gentle reminder.
Mhm. I love that.
It is
And I
very
would even go a step further, which is to say, those cracks may have some utility. They may have something new for you in your life. You learn things when you go through grief. And I always say, I feel like I'm an extreme example because I ended up changing my career as a result of my grief experience. A lot of people that happens to, but for other people, it might be a more subtle change. Like it might just be a change where you realize time is short and nothing is guaranteed. And so you get on the stick about something you care about that you've been avoiding, right? Or you get on the stick about taking care of your health. So you can, because you realize how precious the time with your family is. So there's a lot of, and I always feel challenging when I'm saying this to people who are in grief, because we can see it from the other side, those of us that have been blessed to heal from grief. It's hard to see it when you're in, but there are silver linings, for lack of a better word. And I believe, again, I believe it's part of our journey here on earth, the things we're supposed to grow and learn and try differently next time. So it reminds me of, I can't remember, I'm embarrassed to say, I can't remember if this is a biblical analogy or just another one, but the cracks in the vase of the water bearing, where the cracks are helping flowers grow along the side of the road. So there are spillover effects that can be positive, even from tremendous grief situations.
I was thinking, you said that being able to learn, I think the most, so obviously the loss of my parents was significant, but really the most significant loss of my life was my maternal grandfather. My siblings and my cousins always said that I was Papa's favorite. I grew up on a farm and I would follow him around when he was plowing, he'd have them, I'd follow him around, and when Papa would always say to me, we'd sit on the front porch and he'd say, "Before I die, I'm going to take you." He pointed to these mountains. He said, "I'm going to take you to Lookout Mountain." And one Saturday morning, he got up and he said, "Okay, pile in the car." And it was just me. It wasn't my other siblings. It was just me, my mom, my uncle, who was driving, my papa, and we went to Lookout Mountain in Chattanooga. You guys are familiar with that. And when we came back on Sunday, he went into the hospital and he never came out.
Oh.
Died of prostate cancer. But one, it says the man of God he was, he knew he was doing, so he kept his promise to me. But that was such a deep loss for me. But when I think back on that loss, I remember all the wisdom that my papa taught me. It was my papa who taught me to be an intercessor. It was my papa who taught me how to be the best that I could be. And I think that if I had not allowed myself to grieve, I would have shut myself off from those memories. So I think you're right, Jim. I think those cracks can actually be very helpful in our lives. Thank you for making that observation.
Well, it sounds like your story is a little bit like mine. Your calling was buried in those cracks, right? Like you probably didn't know that at the age you were, but you said
I was 9.
Your
I
work.
was 9.
Yeah. Well, I'm getting chills.
So I'm glad. I thank you for making that observation.
Well, I'm so glad. Thank you. And your story reminded me of one, another definition that I was thinking about sharing. And I think this is going to have special relevance for those of us who are people of faith. So I look forward to having this conversation. The definition is that, I'm trying to make sure this is in the screen. Grief is like having someone who's always been there for you, only to turn to them one more time and they're not there this time. Can you all get a sense of like how devastating that feeling is? And there's actually a similar definition. Clearly, this is not like a dictionary definition. This is like a description definition. But for some of us who've had challenging relationships, it's having that person who was never there for you and you turn to them one more time and they're still not there for you. That's a devastating feeling as well. And I wanted to bring that up, not only, well, from the perspective of how a griever can feel in that situation, very lonely, very desperate, very, all my resources are gone kind of thing. But the part I wanted to bring up is that sometimes the person that goes away for a griever is God. Like they feel disconnected from God the Father when they're struggling so hard with a loss, right? And the reason I bring this up is because if we as fellow people of faith try to wrap our grief support in words of faith and scriptures and beliefs that we know we used to share with that person, if that person is feeling disconnected from God, my concern is they can't tap into the grief support you're offering. Does that make sense? So to me, that feels like a challenging thing to say to people of faith, but I know both of you have faith-based practices. I'm curious to hear your thoughts about that.
You're talking about a person of faith trying to comfort another person of faith with scriptural passages or concepts, and that person who's grieving is already feeling disconnected from God. So those words really have no meaning, or almost possibly a negative meaning, because, oh, well, God failed me, so don't tell me that stuff that you think is going to be true, because I'm not experiencing that right now. It's almost a trauma. It's a trauma kind of inflicted on top of the grief.
Yeah.
And I'm very, very careful when I'm doing my assessment. For instance, in my intake, and I'm sure yours too, Rich, I ask about people's spiritual or faith perspective. So I know if they're atheists, they're agnostic, they have some kind of faith, or and so even if someone comes to me and they tell me that they are a Christ follower, but they are experiencing some pretty deep grief, I do not use scripture. I don't. I may use scripture, but I'm not using those words.
Yeah, right.
You understand what I'm saying?
Yeah, the concept or a second.
I'm using, for here's a perfect one, and I have the scripture here in my office. The one in Philippians, whatsoever things are good, whatsoever things are, think on these things. Rather than quoting the scripture, I'll do the CBT thing. According to CBT, what we think leads to, okay, same concept.
Yeah.
Okay, so I will reframe those in a way that I can hopefully get them to receive the message, not turn them off. And then when they moved along their path, they themselves will then bring the scripture in, and I don't have to.
Yes,
that has been my experience. My practice.
I love it. And Rich, it sounds like that's something that resonated with you too. You paraphrased it so well. Have you experienced that in your practice?
Oh yeah, there's plenty of times in that, because we're talking about grief, we're talking about a loss, and you two ladies referenced it earlier, whether it's a person or an event, right, or even just a change, right? We think of cost benefit analysis when you think about, you got married at 40. Well, there was a cost and there was a benefit, and at that point you said the cost is worth the benefit, right? I will give up this one thing to gain the other. I can't keep both. And so the same thing, applying that idea with faith. Maybe I wanted something, I wanted to keep something, but I lost it and I don't understand, and I don't understand God. And some of that's because I've had maybe confused training or an understanding of what principles or even God's character of it. So it's like even the question of why do bad things happen to good people can start floating into that thing as well. So it gets more and more kind of elaborate or complicated in it. But it's like, Pamela, you did a great job of saying, I need to be careful in understanding what's going on, because one thing they're coming in grieving about may have a lot of other things coming along with it And so we need to be pretty thorough in investigating what are the different components with people that is contributing to their grief. And there may be one or two or three that they could move through, but this other one that's in there is sort of sabotaging them moving forward with the others. And it's this, well, I have this faith, but it's not played out the way I thought it was. And that is now hindering me from dealing with any other stuff.
And they can develop a grief all around that. Here I was this passionate person, you know, in my faith, and now look at me. I feel disconnected. So I have some grief around that as well.
Yeah, right, because it really rocks your identity if you always identified as a person of faith. So, and then if you don't feel you have that rock anymore, that's your identity as well as your support system. So thank you for having that conversation with me, because I wanted to call that out to our audience too, because so many of us, nobody knows what to say when someone's grieving, right? It's always hard to figure out what to say. And a lot of us end up using platitudes like they're in a better place, or things that are based in our faith too. So I'm just calling out, maybe check with the person and avoid using the spiritual language unless you know that that's still something that's of a comfort to them.
Here, one of the other things, and I think you may be able to get into it in our next week or something like that. But the other thing that I find is difficult is people think of grief as the stages that Kubler-Ross developed. And Kubler-Ross did not develop those stages around the grieving person, the person who's living, but she was observing people who were dying and how they were accepting their death. And so our grief is not in quote stages.
Right.
Grief does not happen in stages. Grief is more of a wave, or I call it a spiral staircase. Is what I
That's much better.
Are you going to address that next week, Jinnie?
Sure. Yeah, definitely. The process of it is, and I love that, preface that it's not stages, and then people assume that, and I didn't necessarily recognize that either, because people ask me, I never really studied it. I'm like, it's a process. There are lots of different things that go on, and you may think you experienced this part before. But that's like therapy. Well, I dealt with this before. Well, sure you did, to the level that God took you to, or the level you could. Now we're revisiting that proverbial feeling of the onion. Now you're going to a deeper place, a different place, whatever it is. And people say, well, it's stage, I'm in the angry stage. Okay, well, you may have that happen again, because something will come up later on and you'll get angry about the circumstances because of that thing that is no longer right.
And then you'll come to a place of acceptance, and then, hey, I'm angry again.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Or you can have them all at one time, those conflicting emotions.
Those are fun.
Guilt, everything, So, Pamela, gold star for you. I never met anyone not from the grief recovery background who realized that about the 5 stages. And people are so attached to the 5 stages that I don't always bring it up. So I'm glad that you mentioned that, because that's true. People need to know that it's such a unique journey. There's no boxes to check off, no stages you're going to finish. And,
that's an American way, right? Okay, when do I get to the next one? Can I plan that? Because I have something coming up next Wednesday. So could we move this along? How do I get past and fast?
I only learned that, Jinnie. I was teaching a crisis intervention course when I taught at Kennesaw State University, and that came up in the curriculum, because I didn't know it before I taught that course.
But now you know it, and now we know it, and that's why we have you here. I shouldn't say that's why we have you here. One of the most awesome benefits of having Pamela here is her years of wisdom that I said, that's really good to know. I can use that.
You notice he said years. Is he making a note of my age or something, Jinnie?
Wisdom,
Yeah,
wisdom.
yeah. With you can't be super wise without some years of experience, and you're only in your 30s, so God really blessed
Okay,
you.
I'm a Christ follower, so I'm not going to even endorse that lie.
All right, 50s.
Never give away ladies' secrets.
That's right.
Decide whether she's going to do that.
Yep.
You guys have done this.
I want to make an observation. You said when we opened up, Jinnie, that people might get a little, taken aback by the lighthearted discussion of grief. Let's talk about, Jinnie, why for you it's actually a very helpful thing to be lighthearted in ways when you talk about it.
Well, I don't know that I do it purposefully. I think it just suits, where I'm blessed to be and what my personality is. Do you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And so, to be honest, part of the journey of having a business is figuring out what you think is important and how you want to communicate it. And for me, that's just a journey of becoming more and more integrated and just being really authentic and transparent and letting people feel me. Yeah. So, I mean, that's just how I think about it. But I realize it's a blessing to be that far on the other side of grief, to where I do feel that comfortable and happy about it. And that's what I can express. And one of the things that's great about therapy, as well as the tool that I teach, is you can use what you learn over and over and over to stay, I call it to stay current or to stay clean. So I didn't just go through the grief recovery method once and then put the book on the shelf. Well, that's not entirely true. Like you said, I have to be transparent and authentic because I'm a Christian. When I first started it, I did. And then I got in the habit of using it over and over and over. So I went back and cleaned up more past hurts, but I also use it every time I have something go wrong going forward. So every time a pet dies, every time I have a failure at work, every time I have maybe not every fight with someone important, but every time something significant happens, I go through it again. So I'm always pretty current. Do you know what I mean? And the fun thing is, so we talk sometimes about the analogy of the lion that has all the thorns in his paw. If you have 13 thorns in there and you take out one, you're going to feel a little better, but you're not really good to go. Do you know what I mean? You still have the effects of all those other ones. But what I found is there's a critical mass for me. I cleaned up a number of past things. And now if I stay current, I feel like I describe it as, I'm afraid to say this out loud because my friends will call in and be like, I don't think so. But I describe it as, I'm the most mentally healthy person I know because I'm so caught up on all that stuff, But I do think I'm pretty even keeled compared to, maybe other people that are still carrying around that horrible baggage of grief and stuff. So
for sure.
So we practitioners, we have to keep ourselves as current as we can so we can legitimately be helping the other people. So
for sure.
I guess the observation I wanted to make is that being lighthearted, if you will, is not being disrespectful. And that's what I want people to understand, is that it's recognizing that, hey, I can get through this, and I can celebrate and I can have peace and I can have joy.
Oh, yeah. Thank you for saying that. And it makes me worried. I hope no one thinks I take it disrespectfully because
I don't think so.
I mean, I think it's the most precious experience in the world, like to me, it's really important. I'm sorry that people have to go through it because it's hard, but it's, it's one of those life experiences that we grow so much from and we learn so much from. I take it very seriously and respectfully. Yeah.
Me too.
Yeah, for sure. And I try to keep in mind that, like I mentioned earlier, we're not designed for pain. It wasn't God's original intent. And he spoke to Adam and Eve and was be fruitful and multiply, rule and subdue the earth, enjoy the experience. It was an eternal relationship with God in the status of the garden originally. I mean, so there is that effect as well on us as humans, is this is something we weren't supposed to experience theoretically in the original design. Now, you could argue it wasn't original design to some degree because of a choice and relationship. And I don't want to get all the way down to the theological part that to me helps make sense of all of this. But to recognize that as well, that there is an effect just on us as people having to experience the pain, right? Just that it's inevitable that every man's going to die. So, right, we get in relationships, we get married, we have children, and we don't know exactly what's going to happen, but we do know that it is guaranteed that we're going to die. What order and what experience, and that unpredictable, but we all kind of seem to turn sort of sometimes a blind eye to that. If, yeah, I'm going to get married, something be great. Yeah, but somebody's going to die sometime, and it may be right after you get married, it may be decades later, but you're going to experience pain one way or another, and accepting that that's just the unfortunate reality of our circumstances, right? And then open it up, like Jinnie, you said, work failures and other things that don't go right. It seems like we can take grief and then go into regret and go into self-condemnation when we look at the losses that are very connected to our own choices.
Yeah.
Right. What does that mean for you, having experienced that kind of part of it as well?
Well, a number of things came up. Number one, Daniel Pink just wrote a book that just arrived at my home last night, like early order or whatever. It's called Regret. Something called, subtitle is something like Using the Past to Move Forward. So he's done all this research about regret and again, the positive, the cracks left over that we can use.
As a coach.
Yeah, in a positive way. So I'm eager to read that. I'm sadly, I'm not any more informed about that than just sharing with you the title that it's now available on Amazon. But
you've applied what you've learned about grief to even your own business failures, we could say. And you've kept the attitude of learning and growing through them. Thinking about that, and we can talk about more of that next week too, as far as the process of grief. Some people, I think of the failures and choices I made and the consequences that come over time, that learning from them, it's that, I can't go back and do those again. I'm going to be kind of subject to those consequences for the rest of my life, because those choices send me down a particular trajectory in it. But you can still have the joyful, happy attitude in the midst of that as well. And we'll talk about the process for that. But Jinnie, you can see you're very lively and very happy, and you're making statements that I believe are very true. You've cleaned up a lot of the stuff. The thorns in your paw, so to speak, are limited or eliminated in a lot of ways, or the depth of them. We can go kinds of different analogies that go along with it. But you've obviously done a lot of work, right? So you can even tell your story in such a way that we know you recognize the hurt that was there. But I also experienced sitting with you that, but this sister has taken that and used it for growth, and she sees it through a positive lens, and she can bring that enthusiasm and energy and hope that comes from having processed it in such a way, not just to make it go away, but more so to keep like those cracks in the plates that you talked about, Pamela, that is still part of your story, that you're seeing the beauty of the plate with the cracks in it, not like it has to be a crackless plate. So that's really cool.
Rich, so you set me up for another definition, but Pamela, let me
I was about to say we're getting to the place of winding down, and I was going to ask you what you think would be our pertinent takeaways, but let's do that definition, and then tell us what would be our pertinent takeaways, and let Rich set us up for next week.
Okay, awesome. I'll try to be brief about it. So one of the definitions of grief is that the root cause of grief is undelivered communications.
That's a good one.
Isn't that interesting? Meaning the things we didn't get to say to a person or about a situation. But Rich, what I thought of when you were speaking was You know what else undelivered communication causes is shame. Things that we're afraid to say out loud about ourselves, things that we're afraid to admit to and apologize for. Another analogy I use in my coaching is that the uncoached brain is like a plate of spaghetti. You just have all these thoughts and they're all tangled, and you can't get to any resolution, right? Because they just keep spinning around in there. And when you coach or do grief recovery, you pull one of those strands from one end to the other so you can get some clarity and you can figure out what it is you have to say, whether it's say to yourself, say to God, say to other people. So I think part of that is saying stuff out loud to another living ear and having that person not judge you, or maybe even say, I've been there too. Boom, shame just poof goes away. Hopefully poof, maybe not an immediate poof every time, but so I think that's part of it. Yeah, that's where the lightness of being can come, which is kind of why I want everyone to do the grief recovery method. I don't care if you don't think you have grief. We got stuff we could work on, and you'll get some freedom from that, so that's why I get enthusiastic about it.
Absolutely. Love it. Love that. Undelivered communication. So, Jinnie, what do you think for Rich and I and our listeners, what would be our takeaways that you would hope would be our takeaways?
Yeah. I mean, some of them are built into the definitions. Grief is a normal state of human life. You're not broken. You're perfect right where you are. Number two, there is help to be had. So don't be ashamed or afraid to reach out for that. Seek out the solution that will work for you. And number three, I think it's helpful to realize that any change or loss has the potential to cause grief. Don't think you're not allowed to grieve unless somebody died or unless you had a divorce, right? Like there are a lot of things, and life events will hit people differently. What's very traumatic to me might not be traumatic to someone else. But so let's also just try to love and support each other with whatever's significant to us,
Mm-hmm.
Oh, thank you. That is so awesome.
That's good. Yeah, for sure. Keeping
Which
that
one
in
are we
mind.
looking forward to?
Yeah, that's good. I was thinking, Jenny, this grief is associated with any kind of loss or pain, and don't be ashamed, whatever that is impacting you. We have that tendency to compare ourselves to other people, which short circuits the process. Thanks for giving that a little more of the freedom to say, well, this is impacting me this way.
Yeah.
And also, Rich, I always tell people, don't allow anyone to tell you when you should be done grieving.
Yes, another good point, which will definitely leading into next week, is the process of grief. And that's going to be a critical thing too, to recognize the time frame and your own specific path is not determined to be same as somebody else's. It is your own. So looking at that. So next week we'll get more into the nitty-gritty of how to work this, if hopefully leaving the discussion with a little bit more tools, a little more encouragement that we can move past just feeling grief, but turning that grief into, not turning it into, walking through it and utilizing the experience as a benefit and accepting it to be able to bring more to life, experience more of life, and help others and walk with others. So we do have more of a knowledge of how to help somebody else going through it as well, right? That we have, I know what to do here. We're not a deer in the headlights like a lot of us are in circumstances like, what do I say? Because I know I've seen that. I'm sure you ladies have seen it as well, where people are just kind of looking at you, go, what am I supposed to say? Like, I've got some suggestions, not the ones you may think of or had taught to you, because those are the ones that usually get you smacked.
Right. Jinnie, thank you so much. Wow, thank you.
Yeah, awesome.
You've really poured into me, and I so appreciate it.
Yeah.
I'm so glad. It's been so wonderful to be here. And I was just going to say, you both are so eloquent and describe things so beautifully. I can see why you're leading the flock to do this every Wednesday for Wellness Wednesday. So it's an honor to be here with you. Thank you so much.
Great to have you.
Folks, don't forget about Friday's Noon Nugget.
Love the Noon Nugget.
And registration is open for God, Golf, and Girls. And go to GCB
network.
and become a sponsor. We want to have you join us.
Yep. And Tuesday, Take Charge Tuesdays. I'm not sure who's on the schedule. There's always something awesome. And we will be back here again noon next Wednesday for Wellness Wednesday going on. I don't even know how many months, 18, 19. I don't know. We'll get over 20 at some point. That's why I use calculators. Engineers don't know how to do math. They just use how to calculators. Well, that's all it is. But on that note, don't worry about you having to have all the stuff with grief. You can get help, and these ladies and I will be glad to do that for you. So see you all next Wednesday. Bye.